Hope that you've had a good week. It's good to see everyone here this morning. As Ken mentioned earlier, thankful that the storms came through, did not cause any more damage than it did. We think back to, or at least when I was watching the coverage, I thought back to a couple months ago, right around Christmas when it came through the downtown, and kind of looked a little similar last night. So thankful that we didn't really end up with that kind of damage, as far as I know. And as always, it's great to see everyone this morning. One again, give an update, and thank everyone for asking about my dad. Last 24 hours have been definitely a whirlwind. I spoke to him this morning. He said he's feeling a little rough today. I think it's primarily due to the fact that he's been through a whole lot in the last 24 hours. So, I was telling a couple earlier that he's never even spent one night in the hospital in his entire life, and then here we go. So everything to him was brand new in regards to the whole process. And I'll tell this, and I'll move on. I was in there. They'd already done the procedure, and of course he's got IVs, everything else hooked up ports. And lady came in to do his to get some blood, and I've gone through the process a few times. I've been in the hospital a couple of times and gone through a few things, and I kind of know what to expect. And of course, she twists it in, kind of pops it in to get the blood out. Well, if she pops it in, he kind of jumps. And she said, "Did I scare you?" He said, "I thought you had a needle. You just put me with it." And he said, "I didn't know what to expect." And again, it's kind of brand new to him, but all in all, he said everything is looking fine as of right now. I think that they've got the problem settled out. We'll find a lot more answers today and go from there. But again, thank you for thinking of us, and please keep in your prayers as we go further along. I believe a couple months ago I did a lesson kind of something on this scene right here. But this week I thought a lot about this scene, this movie, and I'm pretty sure that most everyone here knows what this is. This is from a movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And I'm sure that we've all seen it, but this scene right here is to the point to where George Bailey, who has had a fairly rough life, and that every time things look like they're about to progress in the way that he wants it to, every time it looks like he's about to break away from the small town life that he has and go to do the grandiose things that he desires to do, something always pulls him back in. And on this day here, again, as you see the movie, you know that he has lost a lot of money. Something's happened to the money from his business, and can't find it. $8,000 from back in 1945, which would of course amount to a lot today. And looking at things like fraud and going to jail because of how it would impact his business. And as you get to this scene right here, he's gone through everything over many hours, maybe even at this point about 12 hours. Trying to figure out what's going on, trying to save his business, trying to save his life, and trying to make everything right. And it's like it's been one thing after another. And as he's sitting here, he's actually at a bar right here, but he's sitting here, and at this moment, he's praying to God. He is hit about as far as he can with his life. He is at a point now to where he doesn't know what to do, where to go. He's at his breaking point. Matter of fact, the prayer he says in the movie, he says, "I'm not a praying man." He said, "But if you're up there, I need you to hear me." George Bailey has had all that he can take. He's at a point here to where he is literally at the end of his rope. What he's going to do a few minutes later is he's going to walk out those doors. He's going to go to the local bridge. He's going to jump off. Now, his intention was I've got no other solution here. I'm going to end my life. Had an insurance policy, and that was the only thing that he felt like could get his family out of this position, was to kill himself and to get the money from the insurance policy. He is at that point in his life. That is a look of desperation where there's no turning back. Thought about this thing a lot over the last few weeks and months. And this is always one of the most pivotal points of the movie, in looking at just how desperate he is. And that's what lesson this morning is based off of. Looking at the idea of the breaking point. And what do we do when we can't take anymore? Again, we see a man here in the movie who, by all intents and purposes, is not a Christian. Again, he says in the prayer, "I'm not a praying man." He is desperate. He's trying to reach out any way that he can. Doesn't know what to do, doesn't know where to turn. He's turning to answers that he hasn't turned to before. When we look at our own lives and when we hit that point that we're at a breaking point, maybe not necessarily as bad as jumping off a bridge, but maybe emotionally or physically, we have hit our breaking point. We're going to look this morning at what we need to do when we hit that, and we're going to look at one of the examples that always comes out to my mind when I think of a situation like this. And we're going to take a deep look over the first good part of this lesson at Job. If you want to be turning to Job chapter 1, I've got all the passages on the board this morning, but we are going to spend a good time from Job chapter 1 and Job chapter 2 and looking at what Job goes through. I use Job here because we look at the things that he has gone through and the things that he will go through in just a short amount of time, looking at Job's reaction. And we begin here in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 1, where we are introduced to Job. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God and turning away from evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And that man was the greatest of all men of the East. We have an introduction as to who Job is. It says here in verse 1 that he was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. And as we see the events that take place here, then we're going to see exactly whether or not Job is faithful to God as he goes through his hardships. It says that that man was the greatest of all the men in the East. We got a man here who no doubt was a great man. A man here who no doubt was faithful to God. A man that we should all be looking up to, according to this description. Now, verses 2 and 3, we're taking a look here at some of his things. It says that he had 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. What we appear to see here is that Job had a lot of possessions. Possessions in regards to, he apparently has a lot of wealth in his life. You're looking at a lot of livestock here. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, several hundred oxen. This is a man who has, in regards to what we deem very wealthy for this time period. And there's a reason as to why these numbers are put here because of what happens next. Job appears to be a man who has it all. He's faithful to God. He's fearful of God. He does the right thing. And yet at the same time, his life, he has all these things. 10 children and a wide variety of all these livestock for his living. Job was a man of great wealth as is described here. But as we continue on into the story, we see that that's going to be challenged. Part of what Philip read this morning in our reading, as we look at verses 8 through 12, we see that God was speaking to the angels, and there's Satan. Satan is in the presence. Verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. God asked Satan, what are you doing? What have you been doing? And Satan replies with, I've been roaming the earth. We know that Satan is a man who likes to take advantage of people, especially when they're at the hardest. You know that Satan is designed to trip us up, to bring us away from God. And when God asked him, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth. God knows that Job is faithful. God knows that if anyone can resist Satan, it should be Job. And it says here, Satan says, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But reach out with your hand now and touch all that he has. He will certainly curse you to your face. Then the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not reach out and put your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. God is telling Satan here how faithful Job is. And Satan says here, have you not made a fence around him and his house and on every side? Have you not given him all these things? However, he says, no, reach out with your hand and touch all he has, and he will certainly curse you to your face. Satan is saying here that, look, if you take these things away from him, he's going to turn on you. Job is human. He's going to turn on you. And God responds, all he has is in your power. Only do not put your hand on him. Basically, God is almost challenging Satan. Do your worst. He's not going to turn. And as we see, that's exactly what Satan is going to do. God tells Satan of Job's faithfulness, and that's exactly what Satan's about to do. Now, Job has no idea what's going on here. And I read a commentary leading up to this that kind of talked about the importance of Job not knowing, or maybe that could have turned how he reacted. Job is completely innocent as to any of these events. And that's important as to what happens next. As we look at part 1, as I call it, of Job's sorrows. Verse 13 says, Now in the day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the female donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabians attacked and took them. And they also killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, The fire of God fell from the heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, The Chaldeans formed 3 units and made a raid on the camels and took them, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. You got 3 servants who have come to tell Job with some pretty bad news. Now again, let's go back to the very first part of chapter 1 and reread what Job had. It said his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. Again, what we consider to be very wealthy at this point in time. Again, for a man who is a farmer, you're looking at livestock being the very lifeline of his livelihood. And there are certainly very many of those. So as these 3 servants come and tell him that your female donkeys are gone, that your camels are gone, that your sheep are gone, you're talking about a lot of great possessions. I don't mean possessions as in houses and cars and money, but you look at possessions in regards to his life, in regards to how he made his living. You're looking at a lot that's been taken away from Job. Imagine all of a sudden your job is ripped from you, and you're left with nothing. Figuring out how am I going to progress from here? What am I going to do next? I've got to start all over. How am I going to do that? I don't necessarily know because I can't read Job's mind, but if it were me, that's exactly what I'd be thinking. What do I do next? It says that he had many servants to help out with this area and with this livestock, and they're all gone, except for these 3 or 4 who have come to tell him about what's happening. Think about what Job is thinking about here. What is he going to do now? How is he going to feed and support his family now? What does this mean for him in going further? And we don't necessarily know exactly what else Job had besides this. Maybe there's something else here that we don't know about, but again, we're looking at something here to where if this was us, if this was me, my job ripped away, my entire livelihood of how to support my family, how would I react? How tough would that be for me? But we're not done here. As we look at the second part of Job's sufferings and Job's sorrows, we see this about to get a whole lot worse. Verse 18 says, While he was still speaking, another also came and said, Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, as if it wasn't bad enough in that, again, his livestock were gone, you're looking at his livelihood of how he makes his living is gone. Now, all 10 of his children have been killed as well. This, to me, anyway, brings a whole new twist on the story. All 10 of his children have been killed, his sons and his daughters. Imagine if your children, just like that, were gone. How would you react? I can't even imagine losing any of my kids, especially both of them at the same time, just like this. How would I react? We're not done. There's another part here in part 3 of Job's sorrows that we're going to talk about this morning. And for this, we're going to skip ahead to chapter 2. Look at verses 7 and 8. It says, Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with severe boils from the sole of his foot to the top of his head. And Job took a piece of pottery to scrape himself while he was sitting in the ashes. Now Job himself is hit with severe pain. Now God told Satan to begin with, don't touch him. Satan didn't. But as we go back and look at the conversation before this, God says, don't kill him. And so Satan is hitting Job with what we can imagine to be something like leprosy. Again, it's not really described other than this, but that's kind of what I think about when I look at this description. It says that severe boils from the top, from his foot all the way to the top of his head, even painful to the point where he takes a piece of pottery to try to scrape it off. Very, very painful. Now his health has taken a beating. Job is going through all this. He's lost his livestock. He's lost his children. He's lost many servants who have helped him to work the land. And now he's losing his health as well. So with all this being said, again, I think back to, if this was me, how would I react? I go through one or two things in my life, and it's a very tough situation, and it takes a lot for me to get through. What if this was me? What if my job, career, my entire way of making a living was gone, taken away from me? What if my children were taken from me? What if then I was severe with some kind of severe illness? Very, very painful. Don't know if I'll survive that. And yet that's what Job is going through here. Let's take a look at how Job reacts to this. Because Job here should be at his breaking point. When you look at these things right here, Job should be George Bailey sitting there praying to God and going to that bridge saying, I can't take any more. What else is coming next? So let's look at how Job reacts. We go back to chapter 1, look at verse 20, after he has lost his livestock, his servants, and his children. He says, after he found out his children were being killed, verse 20, Job got up, tore his robe, and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and worshipped. He said, naked I came from a mother's womb, and naked I shall return here. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in spite of all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Now, we can really analyze this story very deeply to look at Satan's intention and many other details. And we may do that at some point in time in the future, Lord willing. But we're looking here at Job and how he reacts to all these things happening. Again, his livelihood taken away, his children taken away. And how does he respond? He remains faithful to God. Turns to God. Naked I came, and naked I shall go. Basically, Job is, I would imagine, saying here, if I'm to be next, then let's go for it. But regardless, he is not going to blame God. He is not going to turn away from God. Rather, it says, blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, how many of us can say that after going through all this, we can turn to God and say, blessed be the name of the Lord? Think back to, I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. A book that I read at this point probably 15, 16 years ago, and a story that maybe you've heard. It's been turned into a movie at some point in time about a little toddler that became very sick. Doctors had no idea what was going on with him. He was on the verge of death or in the hospital. Parents were just lost. And again, there's a scene in the book where his parents wrote the book. And his dad talked about how at one point in time that he was dying. Doctors were just lost, had no idea what to do. He locked himself into a room in the hospital and basically just curses God. Why are you doing this? What has he ever done to you? And I can't imagine what my reaction would be if that was one of my kids. I can't imagine thinking about it. But to sit there and purposely blame God, that's not what Job did. And again, I can't really pass a whole lot of judgment because I think about if I was in a situation, I hope that I would do something different. But we see a man here who did do something different. His children were taken from him, and yet he blesses God. And then we see that Job's health, when he's hit with the boils after this, we turn to chapter 2, verse 9, says, then his wife said to him, do you still hold firm to your integrity? Curse God and die. But Job said to her, you are speaking as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we actually accept good from God but not accept adversity? Despite all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Again, up here in chapter 1, this is after he has lost his livestock, his servants, his children. And then Satan takes a step further and hits him with these boils, with this sickness. And then even his wife is saying, okay, are you going to curse him now? Are you going to blame him now? Job's wife has had enough. But again, what is Job's response? He says, shall we accept good from God but not accept adversity? Think about all Job has gone through here. Imagine going through these things, and then many people say, I've lost everything in my life. My life is over. I've got nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to lose, except for maybe just my life itself. Job's at that point. And yet look at how he is still faithful to God. Now, there's much more to the story of Job that we can talk about later on, but I focus here really on the things that he's gone through at these moments. His reaction to this and his response to God. Again, Job has hit his breaking point. And how did he respond? He responded by being faithful to God. This line here is one that's always been interesting in that we accept the good that God gives us. We thank Him for the blessings, but when bad things happen, we have to bless Him, or rather thank Him for those times as well. Not turning against God, not cursing God, but accepting that this is just part of what I've got to go through. That's going to be a lesson for itself later on down the road. But I want to ask you a question now. Maybe. There we go. How do we react when we're tested like Job? Now, I don't know if anyone here has gone through the things that Job went through. I would very seriously doubt it. But we've had people here who have lost loved ones, maybe have lost children, maybe been in a financial situation like Job. How did you react in those times? How will you react if you go through those times? And maybe not necessarily those things severe, but just going through some difficult times, period, in our lives. When things go wrong, when things don't go right, when we feel like we're at a breaking point, how will we react? Will we be like Job? I thought about this story a lot in my life. And again, especially since having kids, and thinking, how would I react in these situations? How would I react when it comes down to this? Again, going back to that story that I read many years ago, it's easy to say, man, that guy said and did the wrong thing. How would I react if I were in that situation? I think what bothered me the most about that story, and I've mentioned this before, is that man was a preacher of some kind. I had no idea what kind of church it was, but he was a preacher. He was a man that should have been faithful to God, who have read about Job and Moses and Peter and Paul and Jesus and many others who have gone through so many hardships. And yet, when his back was against the wall, here's how he reacted. And again, I hope to goodness that would not be how I would do until I'm in that situation. I never really know. Until I've hit my breaking point and I'm forced to react in one way or another, all I can do is sit here and prepare myself. So how do we make sure that we react like Job? What do we do to make sure that if that's us, if we get down that point, that we respond just like Job did? Well, in looking at the closing out here, we have to rely on God and rely on Jesus. The answer here is just like what Job said, in that it was God, it was always about God. I'm faithful to God, and whatever happens, God's in control. And I have to accept that. I had to worship that. I had to make sure that it's outside of my hands. And whatever's going on is for the better part of what God's plan is going to be. I'll look at two passages here and then we're going to wrap this up. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. A passage that I've used a lot, but that really applies here. Verse 6 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything. By prayer and pleading with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. When we feel like we're at a breaking point, we need to make sure that first and foremost we go to God in prayer. We turn to the one being that can make everything better, one way or the other, that has the power to do whatever, to heal the sick, to raise the dead, to save our souls. We turn to God and we turn to Jesus. So first thing we need to make sure that we do is that we turn to God when we're in those situations, just like Job did. Job learned about his livestock and his children. What did he do? Tore his clothes and said, it's time for me to go. It's time for me to go. He blessed God. Praise God. And this is how we do that. We turn to God whenever things get tough. Just as Job said, not just when good things happen. Thank you, God, for this happening. It's easy to thank God when great things happen to us. But how easy is it to, when the tough things happen, to also say, I understand, I accept it, and I'm just going to go along with it. Instead of turning around and saying, why is this happening? Why are you doing this? Again, turn to God and have faith in what's going on. And then look at the words of Jesus himself, as he said in Matthew chapter 11, where he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is comfortable, and my burden is light. Jesus said while he was here on this earth, he provides that comfort. All who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Now we know that as we study the Bible and the events of Jesus, we know that what that's eventually going to mean is that for our souls, there's going to be rest if we're faithful. And that no matter what we face here on this earth, if we're faithful to God, we're faithful to Jesus, just like Job was. There is a rest coming for us that nothing here on this earth can ever provide. An eternity in heaven. And from there, we know that there will be no tears. There will be no suffering. We know that we're going to be with God and Jesus in heaven. And think about being there with all these great people, with Job and Moses and Peter and Paul. And think about how great that would be. Jesus provides us that rest. But in order to get that rest, we have to make sure that we're relying on him while we're here on this earth. Looking to him for inspiration, looking at the sufferings that Jesus went through. If there was ever somebody on this earth that went through a breaking point, it was certainly Jesus. I think about his wandering through the wilderness and Satan coming up and tempting Jesus 3 times. When he had been fasting, he's hungry, he's thirsty. For probably any of us, that would have been a breaking point that would have broke us right there. And yet he resisted. And then, of course, we think about the night that he was to be crucified. We know that as he is praying, he knows what's coming and he is distressed. He's nervous. He is scared. He's sweating. He doesn't want to go through what's about to happen, but he knows it has to happen. You think that Jesus was at his breaking point as he saw Judas and the guards coming up to him, knowing what's coming next? How many of us will go through what Jesus went through? And yet that's exactly where our rest can take us. If we rely on him, if we rely on God. See, it really comes down to doing just what Job did. And that is having faith in God, being faithful to God, and understanding that no matter what happens, God's in control one way or the other. I've heard a lot of people say that when bad things happen, God's doing this to me, God's doing this, it's his fault. What did Job think was happening when all those things happened to him? Who was doing those things to him? Did Job have any idea that it was Satan? Did Job have any idea what the conversation was between God and Satan? He just took it as in, it's happening, it's the way it is, now I'm going to praise God just the same. And that's exactly what we've got to do when we find our breaking point. Because maybe at some point in time, or maybe at some point in time, you've been this right here. And then after saying that prayer, he walks to that bridge and he's looking down in his mind and he's about to jump. He's at his breaking point and he's about to break for good. He's got no other way out. How many of you have been in his shoes at this moment? How many of you are George Bailey right now? Are you at your breaking point? As we close out this lesson, I started working on this a couple of nights ago, or maybe Thursday night, and I started looking at it, started thinking about it, because this lesson this morning is about myself. about things that over the last several weeks, months, that I've gone through and felt for one reason or another. Whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually, I've been at my breaking point several times. And I've gone through a lot of difficulties in trying to go through that. And I sat down making this lesson out, and I went back and forth. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. Not because I didn't want to do it, not because it wasn't important, but because I wasn't sure if it was the right time, the right thing to do. And then yesterday morning, I get a phone call that wakes me up. That could have very easily gone a different way. And as I was getting ready, I thought in my mind, I said these words to myself, I can't take this. I can't go through this right now. See, I was at my breaking point. I've been at my breaking point. And it's tough to go through. I told Heather a few weeks ago, I was George Bailey on that bridge. I wasn't necessarily ready for myself, but I was at that point for one reason or another. And this has been a story about me over the last little while, just for various reasons. But it's been a test to me as to what I need to do and react and looking at what Job did and relying on God. And I feel like I can't go any further. And that's what we've all got to do. In that when we hit that breaking point, we feel like we can't go any further, then we rely on God. There have been times here lately spiritually I felt like I hadn't been where I needed to. I called Norm Wednesday night and say, hey, it's been one thing after another, I'm not going to make it. I was at my spiritual breaking point at that moment, thinking I can't do this again. Got to do better. Things that were outside of my control, but still led me to that point. Whenever we get to that, we have to look to men like Job and how they reacted. We have to make sure that when we feel like we're George Bailey on that bridge, that we take a step back. And instead of cursing God, we thank God and we rely on Him and we put everything into His hands. And whatever happens next is going to happen regardless. Sometimes it works out for the better, sometimes it doesn't. But understanding that it's all part of God's plan. And that is what helps to get us through. It's what's helped to get me through those times. And it will continue to help me get through those times, Lord willing. This morning, if there's someone who is at that point right now, then we can help you to get through that time. Come forward. Maybe you're someone who has been lost, or maybe has been questioning. Maybe you hit your spiritual brick wall, to where you've had a hard time being close to God lately. You've had a hard time being faithful to God. Maybe you have struggled in regards to accepting the things that's going on in your life. Maybe you've done something to where you feel like you need forgiveness for. If there's anyone here this morning who needs to come forward and be baptized, again, everything is ready to be here to do that. Here in just a minute, I want to ask Barry if he will, after the invitation, come up. Because I'm at that point to where I need a little bit extra help. I need prayers. I need help. There have been times where I haven't been the kind of person I need to be and the kind of example I need to be. And I want to make sure that next time, if that's me on the other end of the ambulance going to the hospital, that I'm in the right place I need to be. And that all loose ends are tied up. And I compare myself to Job more than I do Judas. When Judas was at his breaking point, what did he do? Thought that there was nowhere left to go. Went out and killed himself. He did the George Bailey. So this morning, if we can help in any way, please come as we stand and as we sing.
Who at my door?